So glad you Hi, so glad you all joined us tonight, and please share the word about this with your friends and neighbors. We'd like people to join us, and this also is in conjunction with League of Women Voters Elgin area and the Sierra Club Valley of the Fox, which I'm a member of both of those. Tonight we're doing a very one of my favorite parts of this whole series, supporting the sinks. If you saw the first two sessions, sinks are what draw down and take in greenhouse gases. That's where it helps us protect. We have to stop emitting, slow emitting, stop emitting as much as possible, but we also have to support the sinks, the ocean and the land. And tonight we have two very special people joining us from Wild Ones of Kane County, Greater Kane County, Nancy Lamaya and Jean Muntz, who are going to talk to us about a local way to support the sinks in your very own yard, which Dave and I are also starting in on. Start in your yard. If we help Mother Nature, she brings down, I shouldn't say she, I don't like that. Nature brings down CO2. Nature uses the CO2 to support the plants and the trees and wildlife and all the rest of us. So they will be joining us after the video, which is tonight, about 15 minutes, and they will tell us how you can start in your yard, how you can be part of the solution. We cannot just wait for the government. The government has to do their part, but we have to be the grassroots. We have to be doing this too. We have to be part of it. Okay? Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we can address climate change by looking at the sinks of greenhouse gases and also how changes in society can have secondary benefits to climate change. As we think about these issues, one of the best places to begin is supporting nature's carbon cycle. These are things that are naturally sinks of greenhouse gases today. If we zoom in here, we can see how forests and oceans are absorbing over 40% of the pollution we put in the atmosphere every year. Most of that in the form of CO2. And so if we can support those sinks and make sure they stay healthy, that would help us address climate change into the future. But the problem is some of these systems aren't that healthy right now. A lot of our forests are feeling the weight of climate change already, or are being torn down. And our oceans are getting warmer and more acidic, and they're also getting more polluted and over-harvested at the same time. So job number one here is just kind of support nature, give it some backup, and make sure that it isn't diminishing the sinks we already have. Later, hopefully we can augment those sinks by putting other land and other ocean systems into production and add to what nature's doing already. But here's the math we got to start with. 100% of these emissions are coming from us. Land is putting out about 24% or removing it and putting it into our forest. The oceans are pulling out about 17% of the greenhouse gases and putting it into different parts of the ocean. Interestingly, even though oceans cover a lot more of the Earth's surface, they actually take up less of the carbon than land does. Oceans are important, but forests are kind of a big story here. Altogether, that still leaves about 59% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so this is part of the solution, but it can't be the whole solution. And before we look at the individual sinks, there are about 4 major points I think we have to talk about before we even get started. First of all, it is crucial that we give nature support because nature is already doing 40% of all the removal, and we're doing zip. So starting with backing up nature, giving it support, and making sure we don't lose that service of removing greenhouse gases is crucial. Then once we kind of get that stuff secured, we can also maybe add some of our own new carbon sinks, like planting new trees or farming new areas in different ways, or maybe machines that pull carbon out of the atmosphere, all of that. But first, why don't we help out nature that's doing a good job already? The second thing to remember is sinks all have limits. They can't take an infinite amount of greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere. There's no way. Trees only get so big. Soils only go so deep and can have so much carbon in them. Coral reefs can only grow so fast. So we have things that have a limited capacity to absorb our greenhouse gases. That's why it's probably more important to stop them before they ever get in the atmosphere than try to remove them later. And that leads to a third point. Sinks take time to absorb greenhouse gases. If you put out a ton of CO2 today and plant trees to offset that, it might take 100 years for those trees to grow fully to maturity, absorbing carbon out of the atmosphere. But in the meantime, you've got 100 years of climate change caused by the pollution you started with. So you can't really get away with this. By planting trees to offset emissions introduces a time lag where climate change is just going to be worse. There's kind of an asymmetry here. Turning off a power plant stops pollution today. Planting trees or building coral reefs or whatever basically is a solution for 50 to 100 years from now. The other thing we have to worry about is sinks may not always be permanent. They might not be secure. For example, some of our sinks are biological in nature, growing a new tree, putting stuff in the soil, putting stuff in a kelp forest or whatever. Those are biological sinks and they're great, but they can also be reversed. We can plant trees and then they can be burned down. We could farm really well and build up the soil, but that farmer retires, the next one comes in and plows it all up, and it goes back in the atmosphere instantly. So these kind of biological sinks can sometimes be quite ephemeral. They may not be permanent. But some sinks might be more geological in nature. If we can lock up carbon in kind of like a rock, or something like a coral reef, or down in the basalt, or something like that, then we got something that's locked up pretty much permanently, at least on human timescales. So let's look at these sinks one by one. On land, again, it takes up about 1/4 of our emissions, which is pretty amazing. And it's doing it with photosynthesis. The natural vegetation of our planet, especially trees, are growing a little bit faster now, and they're accumulating more biomass, or essentially wood. And when those things die, they build up a little more carbon in the soil, what we call soil organic matter. So photosynthesis, biomass of the living stuff, and soil organic matter. That's where all the carbon goes. And we can help maintain those sinks in nature by leaving nature alone. We can first take pressure off of nature by not clearing forest, for example. And that's where food waste and diets and things like that, where we don't need to grow more food and invade those forests because we're more efficient with the food we already grow. That'll be crucial. But also putting up kind of big protections around the remaining rainforest and peatland forest and other ecosystems to make sure they're never cleared at all. And then once we've kind of taken care of nature and secured it, then we can do exciting things like putting our farmland into new types of agriculture that might absorb carbon, what we often call regenerative agriculture. So we looked at these solutions. We looked at food waste and diets, not by just reducing emissions, but preserving sinks. We looked at how protecting forests didn't just reduce the deforestation emissions, it kept the forest sinks intact too. And then we looked at how changing agriculture and degrading lands back into production and reversing that can be really important as well. One of the things I want to mention, though, is regenerative agriculture is getting a lot of attention these days. This idea that farms and ranches could be farmed differently to absorb carbon. That is true. There's a lot of great evidence showing that we can grow crops and livestock in ways that can actually absorb carbon, whether in trees, in the forested areas around the farmland, or in agroforestry, or in the soil itself. And that's really exciting. But there are limits to how much this can happen. There's only much soil they can build up, there are only so many trees you can build up, and they are all kind of temporary. The next farmer or a drought or a fire could disturb all of them, putting them back in the atmosphere. So be careful there. There's also a few groups that are not really paying attention to the science, I would say, that are making big, bold claims that regenerative agriculture can absorb all of our greenhouse gas pollution. That is just not true at all. The scientific community is quite clear that it is a solution, but it's one of many solutions, and we've got to make sure we balance it with all the others. So when we look at the numbers, we see that protecting ecosystems and reducing food waste, kind of protecting and taking the pressure off of ecosystems, is critical here to preserving sinks. And then we can put the farmlands and the degraded lands into better systems of agriculture so they absorb carbon too. So this combination of kind of taking pressure off of land, protecting it, and then farming or working lands in different ways can be powerful ways to maintain and enhance land-based carbon sinks. The oceans are kind of different. We don't manage the oceans as much as we might on land. A lot of it's out in the open ocean where we don't do so much. Coastal oceans are another matter, though. But either way, oceans as a whole, even though they take 71% of the planet, absorb 17% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And they do it through three major mechanisms. One is what we call a solubility pump. That's just a fancy way of saying CO2 dissolves in water. And what's interesting here is that salt water dissolves CO2 just like fresh water does. But as water warms up, it absorbs a little less CO2 than cold water. So as the climate changes, we can't really expect the solubility pump to get bigger. It's probably going to stay where it is or maybe go down a little. Then we have something called the carbonate pump, which is where living animals pull carbon dioxide and calcium out of the seawater and they use it to build a shell. Our shellfish, things like oysters and clams and mussels, but also crabs and lobsters. They pull that stuff out of the water and build shells that stay there for quite a long time. Corals are the same thing too. Remember, corals are animals. They're not plants, they're not rocks. They're little polyp animals that build a calcium carbonate shell around them that we call a coral reef. And that takes CO2 out of the water as well. And then we finally have the biological pump, which is just basically the plants of the ocean. The little tiny microscopic phytoplankton and diatoms that do photosynthesis, as well as what we call macrophytes, or big plants, like kelp forest. They do photosynthesis, they build bigger plants, and those plants will later die and get buried in the ocean's sediment. So all of those things, whether it's just chemistry, building shells, or growing plants, pull carbon out of the air, through the water, and tuck it away. We can do a little bit to help already, obviously. For example, protecting the coastal ecosystems from being developed or torn apart, like mangroves and wetlands and marshes are critical carbon sinks. But also, they turn out to be really helpful in protecting our storm surges on the coastline. When we have healthy mangroves and coral reefs and marshlands and wetlands along the coast, we don't have as much flooding or as much damage from storms. So it kind of helps us prevent climate change, but also adapt the climate changes already here. That's a good win-win in my book. But we might also be able to add new carbon sinks out in the ocean, maybe through farming kelp in big regenerative aquaculture systems, or maybe planting new coral reefs and oyster beds and lots of other things. We're just beginning to explore the possibilities here, and I think they're going to be really cool. So we looked at land and oceans, but then we can look to machines to maybe become carbon sinks. There are machines out there, kind of in laboratory settings and a few very small pilots. The atmosphere is not noticing these things at all yet. They're way too small. But the idea here is maybe we could build machines that would pull carbon out of the atmosphere and either store it down in the rocks somewhere or tuck it away and lock it up, or use it for something. That's the one that gets me really excited. If we could pull carbon out of the atmosphere as carbon dioxide or whatever, and use it to make plastics or jet fuel or other things society might want without using oil at all. Use pollution to make our stuff, not new oil. Leave the oil in the ground, we'll take the old stuff out of the air. That would be really cool. This is nowhere near being deployable right now, but some of these technologies are very interesting. And over the next 10 years or so, I think we're going to see a lot more rapid development of these technologies, and they may start to play an important role. So we've looked at the carbon sinks, and before that, the carbon sources. And we can see by reducing pollution, working with nature, and maybe augmenting nature, we've got a lot we can do about climate change. But there's a third principle too, that improving society, not because of climate change, but because it's the right and moral thing to do, turns out to be a great set of climate solutions. It's kind of interesting. And turns out improving equality and equity, especially with women and girls, for example, improving the access to education and healthcare helps women and girls see new opportunities around the world. And as a consequence, women and girls will have maybe fewer children, but healthier children a little bit later in life than they might have otherwise had. And when that's the case, the growth of population in the future might bend down earlier than we thought before. While population growth actually isn't really responsible for most of climate change, most of the emissions are from rich people, not poor people. Future population growth slowing down will actually help us a little bit in the long run as population growth and economic development drive up emissions in the future. So this is a great win-win. By helping women have new opportunities, we might actually help the environment and the climate as well. So it turns out that helping people, for lots of good reasons, actually can help us with climate change as well. And this represents kind of a win-win opportunity to improve human well-being as well as improving our future climate solutions.
That was really great. I love that particular session. It really speaks to us. And this evening, I'm asking Nancy Lamaya and Jean Muntz to take it from here and share with us their program that they have started in Elgin. That's called Start in Your Yard. And it's also been I think promoted by Doug Tallamy, who's a very well-known writer on climate, how to sustain the animals, the insects, the plants, and we're part of that cycle. We got to sustain all of us to be sustainable. So I'd like to turn it over to my friends, Jean and Nancy.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to, and our first point is that really there is another land-based carbon sink that we're particularly interested in, and that is the prairie or the grasslands. And our speaker made the point that forests can be unreliable sinks in the face of global warming with its droughts and fires. And a study by the University of California at Davis found that prairies, which store carbon underground, are more resilient, more reliable than even the forests. Mm-hmm. Now, our interest is not in making comparisons, but in letting people know that we have an opportunity right outside our doors. We can plant native plants in our yards and in our common areas, and they will store carbon just as the forests do. So Start in Your Yard wants to help people shake off the fear and overwhelmment, the sense of impotence and doom, and do something that won't need to be undone in the future. Do something powerful, be part of a national effort to convert 20 million acres of lawn into the largest national park in the US, the Homegrown National Park. The Doug Tallamy idea, the man that Sandy was mentioning before. Our native landscape, you should see the horrible slide I have here of a property with just bare grass. Our native landscape has fallen victim to destruction through neglect. And we have not understood the importance of its healthy interconnections. We humans have destroyed so much of it that we're imperiling our own survival. So Start in Your Yard seeks to help people appreciate the beauty of our native plants and and now, of course, I'm looking at gorgeous slides that show the beauty of our native plants, and to understand the benefits of bringing them into our daily lives by creating healthy landscapes that are also habitat. A report in the journal Scientific Reports states that even if all state and federal public lands in the United States were protected to benefit endangered species, more than half the country's endangered species would still be in danger of extinction. What this means is that property owners, not just purveyors of public land, need to landscape in ways that also feed and shelter wildlife, that store carbon rather than emitting it through maintenance of lawn, which lawn provides no habitat. The meadows and prairies, grasslands, and forests that evolved the intricate systems of life have largely disappeared. and we're beginning to feel the results.
Nancy, you might be able to share your screen now,
Okay, let me see
I
if
don't
I
know.
can.
since Sadia is,
Let's check it out. Oh, thank you, Sandy.
just a question.
Excellent. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I promise not to go back through all the things that I
Oh,
said.
do.
But this is the slide that I was saying, that this place is
Oh.
so bereft of any kind of healthy habitat. Just this lawn, which makes no contribution whatsoever to our health or the health of the wildlife. And this is the slide that I was showing when I was talking about the fact that we've destroyed so much. This is not unusual. This is how so much of our land looks. And when you think about what used to be here, the gorgeous native plants and meadows and grasslands, it's just amazing what we have destroyed in the interest of building more and more things that we think are going to satisfy our needs. So this study has really given evidence that we need, as property owners, to be involved in landscaping and sharing our properties because there's nothing left. The public lands are insufficient, even if they were in good shape, which they're not. So changing how we see our place in the web of life changes how we treat nature. And that is so much what Start in Your Yard is about, changing how we see nature, that we regard the rivers and oceans as the lifeblood of our planet, that we protect the lungs of our earth, that we admire and imitate the way nature wastes nothing, that we appreciate how much nature produces beauty in such abundance, you know, for no human purpose, just for beauty itself. Or at least that's what some are hypothesizing. So Start in Your Yard urges us to bring the important, valuable, unique gifts of what has existed for millennia into our individual and shared lives to create health and beauty right where we live. We understand that our individual landscapes combined into living corridors can be visually attractive, carrying the role of traditional gardens, and also be part of the solutions to our mounting crises. They provide habitat for the insects, birds, and other wildlife that are part of the same web of life that we're all part of. At the same time, these native plants sequester carbon in those immense roots that made destroying the prairie such a formidable task for those who turned almost all of it into farmland. And now I'm going to stop sharing, and thank goodness we can, and turn things over to Jean for her part of the presentation.
All right, I'm going to see what works here. How is that? Do we see a Start in Your Yard sign?
We do.
We do.
No. Actually, no. We see your words.
You see my words. Okay, so that may be that.
Oh, and at the bottom, it says slide 1 of 12.
Yeah, and this was how yours was, Nancy, too.
Yeah.
I saw all your notes and everything.
Yeah.
Really?
So
Oh,
I'm-
well, who
So
knows?
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, do.
I'm afraid to mess around too much.
Yeah.
But
Who knows what's happening?
anyway, what you see here is a symbol, our logo of our initiative that's Nancy's already told you is called Start in Your Yard. We're here to spread the word about that program. And it, like we've said, it's sponsored by the Northern King County Wild Ones. This initiative was inspired by ideas put forth in several books written by the entomologist Doug Ptolemy. Sandy told you that, who persuaded a number of us to take a look at what is in our own yards with an eye to how we too can make a difference. It really changed the gardener in me.
Me too.
Allow me to outline some of the underpinnings for this type of gardening that Dr. Ptolemy brings forth. And here's a picture of what his book looks like, Nature's Best Hope, an approach to conservation that starts in your yard. He's an entomologist, a researcher, a college professor, a photographer, an author, a gardener, and probably much more. And bringing him to Elgin was something we have done in the past, and we were looking forward to doing it about a year and a half ago. But that was obviously, that idea was thwarted by the onset of COVID. But his ideas began to grow in the committee of us who were, instantly dashed. Our hopes of bringing him here were instantly dashed, but here were these great ideas, and they began to grow as we talked about them. And so I want to show you some of what inspired us about his work. He urges us to remember that we are nature. The plants, animals, insects, birds, and humans are all interconnected in such a way, which means everything we do affects our collective home. The nature we are part of, the nature that provides our clean air and clean water, is made up of very specialized relationships. These are species that co-evolved and were here long before the European settlers came to America or the Kimball family settled in Elgin. The way species interact is crucial. We all know the story of the monarch butterfly and how its larva is dependent upon milkweed, the milkweed plant. Well, that 80 to 90% of our native insects are specialized in a similar way. We just know about the butterfly, the monarch, because it's so charismatic. And these relationships are all being threatened. And as Nancy showed you an aerial view of a neighborhood, here's another view, because this slide is meant to depict all the ways these relationships are being demolished. Development, agriculture, loss of topsoil, millions of acres of non-native plants and grasses along power lines and railroad tracks and roadways, and 40 million plus acres of turf grass in our yards. Our lawn can only absorb 25% of the rain that falls on it. That means it leaves 75% to become runoff. The average American yard is 80 to 90% turf grass, leaving a mere 10 to 20% in plantings. And besides that, we have in the last 50 years lost 50 billion birds and unknown other species. Even though Dr. Ptolemy urges us to embrace native species, he's not suggesting that we eliminate all grass or all non-natives, but that we could aim for a 70 to 30% native to non-native mix. How about leaving some mowed paths or mowed area rugs to allow for some play space? And plant choice matters for a healthy environment. Even some native plant species are not equal in the role they play. There are what Dr. Ptolemy has identified as keystone species that contribute more than others. About 5% of our native species do 70 to 75% of the work. Does this remind you of any organizations you've been in, perhaps? And among these high performer keystone plants is the oak, which is regarded as the absolute king because of the hundreds of species it supports. And one could go on in book length about this. And actually Doug Tolomei has, and he has a new book out called The Nature of Oaks. And it's a fascinating read about how special the oak tree really is to our ecosystem. He suggests that we reduce our millions of acres of unproductive, biologically barren monoculture of grass that acts like a blanket and inhibits the productive systems that would otherwise be growing here. Now that we know this, we can do better. Lawn can't capture and retain rainwater to protect rivers and streams or recharge the water table, but natives can. Here's my favorite, over on the far left.
Oh, I love that.
Turf grass with its 2-inch roots. And then you see the native prairie plants with their root system. Lawns can't enrich the soil beneath. They can't remove toxins and store carbon, but natives can. Lawns can't feed the insects that feed the birds that bring life back into our yards, but natives can. Let's transition from using great expanses of lawn. This seems a necessary and logical consequence of using more thoughtful landscape design. Doing this would reap long-term benefits immediately. And I was struck in the film about how, we could create carbon sinks with trees, but there would be lag time before they would start to do the carbon sequestering. But here, natives start right away. And the yards I'm showing you here, 3 examples of native yards, are all here in Elgin. One is Nancy's yard, one is a section in my yard, one is a section in a friend of ours, Kieran's yard. So it is possible to do these things in this community. Wouldn't it be neat if the new indicator of status on the block had nothing to do with biologically barren mowed monoculture of grass? And that it could be something like the neighbor who can brag she's seen a rusty patch bumblebee on her Monarda, or a nesting hummingbird in a shrub in her yard, in the 9-bark shrub in her yard. It would enrich our lives to become familiar with native plants and their special relationships, the ones that do the important work for us, the ones that give the gifts of clean air and clean water. And in exchange, all they need is our protection and care. Native plants belong here. They are hardy, acclimated, and support the local wildlife. It's one thing to say that we care about something, but the real work of the world is if we care for it. Doug Tolomei reminds us we all carry responsibility for stewardship of the earth. Let's shrink the problem into something manageable. Let's begin right here. We won't have to wait for governmental action. Let's use native plants in updated ways. This way, our yards will demonstrate how gardens of native plants can be both beautiful and at the same time benefit our local ecosystem. Does any of this seem like a good idea to consider? We're interested in your reactions.
Jean, I saw a question in chat for both of you, and it's a great question from Barbara News. Could you link to or list what plants you use or recommend for replacing sections of grass and what care they need?
Well, do we have a resource for you? The startinyyouryard.com website has exactly that. It has a number of plant lists. It has places to go to research the plants. It has inspiration. It tells what's happening in this whole discussion, gives you resources for how to plant, how to prepare to plant, who to hire to plant if you're looking for someone to hire, where to buy plants. It's all out there on the resources page of startinyyouryard.com, and I will put that in the chat. So as easy it is to remember, you'll have it in writing as well. So,
And I can vouch for the fact this is very, very challenging. Dave and I are both just a bit over 70. Anyway, and it's, I've told Dave, I mean, we know we have to do as much as we can now because it does get harder as we get older. But the thing is, we used to do annuals all the time in the good old back days when we were young, but perennials come back every year. You don't have to put them in every year. And you can buy these, and I'm trying to think which ones are native and which ones aren't. There's perennial geraniums that are about, I'm trying to say, this big around, and everything underneath, there's no weeds. If you do really careful selection of the natives, you can have flowers year round. I don't mean the wintertime, but all summer and all spring and fall. And a lot less work. And you don't have to wait for whatever it is for annuals, June or July, to see your first flowers. Anyway, that's
such a good point. I was so struck by that this spring when I had been seeing flowers since March, and others were waiting until Mother's Day to go to the nursery and buy their blooming plants. So it's plus it's a relational kind of thing. You get to know your plants, and then you know what to anticipate. And I find myself out so early looking to see what's come up and who's come back. And yeah, it's
exactly. And Sandy, you mentioned something else that triggered a thought with me too, was notice the pictures of natives that we were showing you. They're crowded, packed together, looking great together, great combos. And that doesn't allow for weeds in between. Once they're established, that is one. And the other wonderful thing about natives is because they co-evolved with plants, animals, insects, the soil, the climate, the weather here, etc. They don't need additional water. It's in their DNA to accept what we get in this area. And they don't need fertilizer because they're actually building the soil. So, that's all eliminated for us as gardeners.
And when we were talking about blooming plants, the other thing I wanted to mention, I saw a slide of Jean's yard one time and I was like, how did you do that? This garden looks completely different. It looked this way in spring and this way in summer, this way in fall. But today I was out and I looked at my garden, which earlier in the season had white anemones, just full of white anemones. And today it was absolutely purple with asters. Yeah. So that's part of the fun of natives. You aren't stuck with the same thing all for every season. It can be planted so that it changes. And I'm absolutely stuck on that idea right now. I think it's so fun.
I think I read somewhere, I don't know if it was in Talamy's book or where it was, for nature and for sustainability and regenerative principles, you don't want bare ground. And that's where natives, that's where weeds grow. We don't want bare ground.
Well, as a nurse in a former life, it's as though Mother Nature considers open ground a wound, and
Mm,
she will cover it as fast as she
Yeah.
can with anything that might be there in
Yeah.
the seed bank.
Yeah.
And so that's why in natural settings, we see plants absolutely packed together.
mhm.
She doesn't tolerate, Mother Nature doesn't tolerate the wound being open. And when there's open ground, carbon is leaving. Carbon dioxide is leaving that open ground. So
Doesn't this come through, I'm thinking way back when, the ideas of, we've been enculturated to have this British formal garden view where they had maybe hundreds of people to put mulch down between the plants.
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
great book, I think, by McCoy. It said, if you go out in nature, you don't see ground up trees between other plants. Now
Yeah.
you see some that decay and die, but they're actually nurseries. You could have it a log that's a nursery for more plants.
uh-huh.
But we don't need that bark down there. We don't need, and that's just a way to get us to buy that. We should have our leaves between. That's what we've been trying to do.
That's right. In
Keep them-
nature, it's the leaves that are in the woods. You see, it's the leaves that fall, and then whatever works on those leaves to decompose them creates the forest floor.
And
And in the prairies, the whole plant that.
Yeah.
And it brings back those caterpillars too that we don't see too many of now, because I know Robin Migalla, who's not with us tonight, but she'll come back next week. She's traveling, but she was saying, larvae drop from the tree and they live all winter in the bark chips or the leaves.
Yeah, the leaf litter.
And underground. Mhm.
They hatch in the spring.
Yeah.
So we've got to tolerate a few. The bugs that are out there and the creepy crawly things, that's food for somebody. That's part of the cycle of life.
Yeah.
Please avoid, and you go to the garden depot things and insect proof, deer proof, bug proof. I mean, the next thing's going to be us. It's going to be, I don't know, it's going to not, we're not going to survive if we keep doing that. And I love what Jean said this morning, this kind of thing about solutions to climate change. It really, as Jean shared with me, lights her fire and floats my boat. And it just really, once you're involved in it,
Yeah.
Mhm.
it's
It's exciting. But I think you were alluding to it. All of us have in our comments so far, is that it's about being able to change what we've thought of as our paradigms, about changing a paradigm about what we think of leaves, for instance, and starting to see them as an absolute treasured resource for us as a gardener, not something that we want to eliminate and put in bags and get out of the, that's a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is not having to double dig to prepare a garden to properly take perennials. That's gone by the wayside. It's what is beauty? And Karen, our friend Karen, jokes about someone she knows who she doesn't tolerate having her plants touch each other. So, yeah, so she, but we all come up as gardeners from some point, not the same starting point, but then we evolve. We learn new things, we see new ideas, we get new information, and it's an evolving thing. I still am evolving as a gardener. There's, I think any of us would say that.
I
Right.
think one of the biggest things anybody can do is just take a little quick walk in the woods somewhere, and there's lots of forest preserves around, or go out to Jelke Creek. That's a prairie type of thing, and see all that's going on there and how it works. And I think we can get away from this formal garden. I'm going to control these plants or else that's not what it's about for me.
My sense, I'm sorry, Sandy, go ahead.
No, that was it.
My sense is that we have become so civilized, so
Yeah.
unwild, that we're beginning to treat the outside of our homes like we do the inside. We want everything clean and tidy and not moving and staying in its place, and just everything that you would expect inside.
Mhm.
And as we have moved in that direction, we have just lost more and more and more of this web of life that supports us.
Yeah.
And we can't live without it. So if we destroy it, get to that tipping point that destroys it entirely, we are not going to be able to survive as a species. I'm not saying that we're not going to survive as a species, but we need that web of life that provides the foundation. And
We're endangering ourselves. I mean, I like to try to be as positive as I can, and it's not easy. We're in a code red with the environment. We have to do this now. So I keep thinking energy efficiency is something that we can all do at home, in our workplace, even in our churches. And you can save a lot of emissions, but this nature thing, Barbara asked where you can see a particular creek or preserve. Jelke Creek, Jelke. I'll put it in the
I
in the
just
list.
put it in the chat, Sandy.
It's on Sleepy Hollow Road, which is an extension of McLean Boulevard. It's a great prairie thing. Dave and I just absolutely love it. It's easy to walk. There's different sized paths, but you can get a forest preserve guide. There's forest preserves all over, and there's always different sized paths you can take. You don't have to take a long one. You don't have to go miles and miles. You can do a short one. So,
Well,
Come
and
to the
Nancy,
farmer's market and we'll give you a guide to the
right.
forest preserves
Jelke Creek.
at our Start New Yard Wild Ones booth.
And you guys, Wild Ones, although I'm a member, I don't go to the meetings, but it's a very helpful way to get ideas from other people.
And support and share your passion. We find that people just love talking about what they are doing and are passionate about. So it's an opportunity to do that at our meetings, our tours, farmers market. And this summer we actually had Monday night roundtables. We would come in from the muddy outside. Well, we wished it were muddy, but it was pretty dry. Come
Dry
in
as
from
a
the
bone.
outside. Pardon? And
dry as a bone.
dry as a
inside.
bone and talk about various things. So yeah, getting together is good.
This has been a very, I tried to do the front yard to convert to natives, and I did lose quite a few little starts because of the drought, but you've got to hang in there and just keep planting. And once they take over,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe something. I know invasives are not the thing you look for, but if anybody walks through the real small creek area between where I live, Eagle Heights, and then Valley Creek, there's a little path there. Used to be covered with garlic, mustard, all different kinds of things. Now it's totally covered with these. It's Illinois wildflower. It's the dooryard violet.
The violet,
It's
yeah,
totally covered. I mean, and this is the wildflower of Illinois.
yeah.
I'm going to get some of that for ground cover in my yard, but I don't want it to take over for everything else. So,
Well, it's very easy to pull.
yeah.
It's
And-
not deep rooted at all. So I kind of treat it like a ground cover in my yard.
I just love violets. They're just,
Mhm.
and
So-
ferns. Any
There
other
was a
questions?
question, Sandy, about where the chat was going, and I didn't catch what all that was.
I sent the information out to everyone. We had
Oh.
a set on the 2 needs to be changed to everyone for the
Oh.
attendees to see it.
Oh, sorry, yeah. How can we do that? Can I do that? No.
I did send it out. Yeah.
To everyone. Okay, I'm sorry. That's Jelke Creek. My kitty cat, she always helps me on Zoom. Jackie Creek. Any other questions? Anybody? We have last two programs next week together. And they are, let's see, putting it all together and getting it going. So I hope you all sign up again. And you can access, I should put that in the chat also. You can access these programs at any time. Anybody can see them. Let me finish. North. I should say too sleepy. Can't do anything in a hurry.
Well, we have a question from Barbara. Do any of you have any grass left, or is it all ground cover and native plants? And I think you saw in Jean's slides that there is grass. I have a lot less than I had 10 years ago,
Yeah.
but I like some grass because it provides a definition to the beds that I like to have. I don't have it that way everywhere, but I do have some grass left, and I will keep some grass. Yeah. Jean, did you
Yeah,
want-
the same in my yard. I do have, the term I heard that I really love is some area rugs of grass. Yeah, because, you know, you want to have an area you can throw a ball or play croquet and so Doug Ptolemy's not suggesting we eliminate all grass. We're not suggesting that, but yeah, just cut down on how much of that blanket is obscuring the biodynamic engine that's really there. So,
and you could do all grass and all native plants and
mhm,
grasses and sedges. And if you wanted paths, you could mow paths
just
through it.
mow.
So that's what they do often in the forest preserves. And then you can let it recover and mow a different path. So there's way, way, way more than one way to participate in this kind of solution.
I
Mhm.
did have one friend, older lady friend who has passed away sometime now, but she was way ahead of her time. Shirley Simon, if any of you remember her.
Yeah.
She had a regular small city lot, a regular quarter acre, whatever it is. And she had 25 trees, as I recall. She always bragged she had 1 square foot of grass left. You know, it was incredible.
Yeah.
But she had walking paths through the vinca, which is not native, but I like it, and the ivy, which I don't know if that one was native. We weren't talking about native. She had all the 3 trilliums. She had so many different wonderful, wonderful plants there. And going in her backyard was just like going into the woods. And to me, that's the ultimate. That's,
Mhm.
Well, and you have a wonderful comment here from Barbara. Shirley Simon was my wonderful aunt.
oh,
Oh, yeah,
Isn't that
she
fun?
really was so
yeah,
good.
that's neat.
She was such an inspiration to me.
Wow.
Well, and that reminds me too, one of the key ways to manage that most of us native plant gardeners have found, ways to organize and manage things is to make sure make sure you have edges. It could just be
Yeah.
a simple dug edge or a mowed edge. Make sure you have an edge around your natives, and then they look contained. They look,
Where there's,
more orderly,
Mhm.
which pleases more people. And it just seems to be the answer to so many ways of managing natives in a large yard.
Mhm, mhm.
And what we're finding, we go out and do site visits with people who are interested in beginning to make some changes, take out some turf grass, put in some native plants. And we're finding that what we thought was true is true, that once you get started, it's like then nature embraces you and pulls you forward, because it is so fascinating, so satisfying. And it changes then over time our relationship with being out of doors, our relationship with what's wild, with what's acceptable, with what we long for.
Mhm.
So that, it's more than just the native plants themselves. It has to do with what happens inside of us as well. And those kind of changes then underlie the solutions that we need will to
Mhm.
put into
Mhm.
effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's therapy for me. And I know there's probably something psychologically destructive about this, but I love to go out and pull weeds.
Oh,
I do too.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
You know, to smell soil, I guess I grew up across the street in a subdivision across the street from my grandfather's farm. He had very sandy soil, and I love the soil we have. And then I took some soil class, a soil class in my undergraduate, and lately have gotten the thing about mushrooms and all the mycelium under the top of the soil. If your soil is healthy, if you
Yeah.
stop putting chemicals on them, on the soil, you've got to let that mycelium grow. It's just absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite photographers is Taylor, what's his name? Oh, some pictures of mushrooms and things like that.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It goes all over the world
Wow.
Wow.
and take
Beautiful.
pictures of them. Now, you won't necessarily get these in your yard,
Mhm.
probably. But
Well, that's another whole world that we're just learning about and have lots to learn, have
there's so much.
far to go.
There is a wonderful book by Merlin Sheldrake called Entangled Life that, well, it's just packed with information on this very topic, and it is astounding. It just blew my mind. So if you're interested in finding out more about what Sandy's talking about, try it.
I bought a book one time and I left it at the Nature Center. I don't know if it's still there. It's a very large book, but some young people went out and cataloged all of the critters, insects, and everything that they could catalog in 1 square foot of dirt. And it was just,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
wow. Some things I don't like to get too close to, but I'm glad they're
Mhm.
down there doing their thing.
Mhm.
Centipedes are not my favorite, so.
And when you're mentioning measuring what's in a square foot, Jean, help me with this. Do you remember that statistic for how many native plants grew in a single square yard of prairie? I think it was in Braiding Sweetgrass with Robin Kimmerer. I think it was over 200 plants
That's
in this one square yard.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I can't
Yeah.
remember that, and I've seen
Yeah.
another reference that how much grows within a hula hoop.
Yeah.
If you lay a hula hoop down and what that area, how many hundreds of natives would be able to grow in there. Yeah.
Which just brings
Just
us
boggles
to,
me.
yeah, which brings us to another point that we have been bamboozled about, and that is that nature is red in tooth and claw. It's all competition. And what we're learning is that there is an enormous amount of cooperation. You don't have 200 plants living in, a square yard or a hula hoop without cooperation. So
Right.
yeah,
It's a world underneath the soil. I think 1 teaspoon of soil has, I don't know, it's innumerable number of organisms.
Yeah,
But we got to keep it all healthy, and then we'll stay healthy, I hope.
that's right.
yeah, they're tied together, that's for sure.
We're part of this food chain, and I'm really worried about the bees. I really like food. I really like to eat. We gotta keep life going, guys. Anyway, I think we're just about, we're out of time here. Was there another question here from anybody? Entangled Life, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm gonna write that down by Merlin Sheldrake. Thank you. And that Nature of Oaks by Talamy. I could not believe one of the keystone plants is the white oak, I believe, that can provide, is a place where they have found up to 300 or 400 different kinds of.
yeah,
plants.
depending on where in the United States, some places oaks will support 500 plus
Caterpillars.
species. In our area, it's somewhere around 480 some in the oaks in our area, 480 species.
And part of why that's so amazing is that so many insects are specialists and only can feed on, you know, 1 or 2 families, maybe 3. But for the oak to be able to support that kind of, yeah, it is the king. It's amazing.
It's the king.
Yeah, it's great. And there's a lot of squirrels planting them in all of our yards.
I hope
Just
so.
let them grow. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been great. Any last, I think we don't have any questions left or anything. I'm just so glad everybody signed on, and please, I'm gonna try to download, or I have to send it out to people. There's a link you can get, Project Drawdown, Climate Solutions 101, and you can see any and all of these programs. They want them to be shared. If you know anybody who can share it with other people or any group, there's no cost. They want